Welcome to our latest in the series of Q&As live on Facebook. My name is John Campion and I'm the West Mercia Police and Crime Commissioner. Part of my role as the governance of the police is to act to ensure that they have a budget set, but also that they have a plan to work for and that they're held to account for the service that we as a community receive. As part of that, engaging with the community is a central part of that role, and we'd normally be doing that in face-to-face in a series of summer events. Now, that's not possible, obviously, with the ongoing health emergency, so we're using Facebook dedicated to different areas, geographic areas, to try and ensure that we are engaged with our communities. Tonight, we're focusing on Shropshire. Next week, we'll be in North Worcestershire, South Worcestershire, and in Hereford. But tonight, as I say, we're focusing on Shropshire, and I'm joined by my two colleagues who I'll let introduce themselves. Mo, do you want to introduce yourself first?
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone watching. I'm Superintendent Mo Lansdale, and I'm the local policing commander for Shropshire. I have the responsibility for leading the police response to the communities locally within Shropshire, making sure that we effectively respond to any requirements, both locally from the communities and victims and witnesses, and making sure that we focus on our three key priorities of safer homes, safer roads and safer people.
Thanks very much. And Tracy? Who's muted?
Sorry about that. Good evening to those in Shropshire. I'm Tracy Onslow. I'm Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner for West Mercia and have been for the last 4 years. And one of my responsibilities is around projects that we commission, things like the diversionary network, and my other responsibility is looking after John, which is no easy task, of course.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Tonight, about half an hour, talking about summer policing and some of the challenges to our community, but also looking forward to see what happens next. It's a very warm evening tonight in all parts of West Mercia. I don't envy Mo in your uniform. I know Monkmoor is particularly warm as well, so not blessed. So we'll try and get you away in about half an hour or so. Firstly, Mo, I just wanted to touch on really been quite a monumental 3 months for policing, really. The biggest impingement in our civil liberties in a very long time, and the police obviously having a role in that. And just interested in your reflections in the last 3 months.
Yeah, as you say, really, it's certainly something that I've never experienced in my service, and pretty much none of our colleagues have either. So something very new to all of us, and particularly around the policing and the legislation that came out in relation to COVID. So something that we had to pick up very quickly. We adopted a process very much in Shropshire, which was about engaging and speaking to our communities and basically wherever possible just advising around the changes in the legislation that COVID brought in. The vast majority of the communities were really open to that. They adhered to the COVID guidance and legislation. We had some really good support from our local communities in our engagement with them, always willing to speak to us. Hopefully members of the public in Shropshire did see that increase of those officers patrolling, just providing that additional reassurance. I mean, as we all felt it, I think, you know, it has been and still continues to be very concerning for a lot of people. I know for particularly vulnerable members of our community, very difficult where they were suddenly isolated and were unable to go out. But it was really pleasing for me to see how the local communities actually came together and supported one another. You know, so I'm aware of local food banks being set up, neighbours supporting each other, and certainly we've seen locally that real sort of community pulling together and supporting one another. Been difficult for us in relation to sort of resources around, you know, as members of the public have experienced COVID, so have our officers and staff. So very much being able to respond to that. How we responded to incidents, obviously we had to adapt to that as well, utilising police, you know, sort of personal protective equipment, asking relevant questions when attending incidents. But again, to be fair, we've had really good support locally from the communities in Shropshire. So if I could, I'd like to use this sort of opportunity to say thank you to them as well for their support.
And I think that's an important part of this. Around, I'm very proud to be commissioner here in West Mercia, and they're pretty vocal some of the times, our communities, and Shropshire's no less so than others. But when the chips are down, they definitely pull together, and seeing that sense of partnership between public services and the police over this last 3 months and the public themselves has been really impressive. And I know lots of people stood on their doorstep clapping for key workers and recognising that contribution. And for me, I've been proud to see that. Sorry, Tracy, I talked over.
No, I was just going to say to Mo, now Mo, some of the residents out there might be thinking, well, actually, what have the police been doing? Because the shops are shut, so there can't be any shoplifting, not much traffic on the roads, can't be much speeding. So it must have been an easy time for you guys, really, just, you know, asking people to go home and things like that. Quite easy, but I doubt that's the reality of it.
Yeah, we've certainly had some complexities, particularly around attending incidents, making sure we had the right equipment. As you can imagine, when we've had to arrest certain people for offensive, we've had occasions where people have come into custody that potentially have shown symptoms. So then very much we've had to change our way of policing around that and how we've managed our response there. And certainly what we did look to utilise, you know, during that time is our work was still coming in. We've had to adapt to that. So our focus on serious organised crime, that continued. And I made sure, and everyone was really clear here, that just because potentially some incidents had dropped off, that doesn't mean that we took our foot off the pedal, if you like, and we've sort of continued to drive proactive work as much as we can during that time. We've still had serious incidents coming in, and certainly the demand that we're seeing now is increasing again, but you know, we've got the resources here to be able to respond to that.
And that's for me been quite an impressive sign as well. As the organisation flexes to meet its challenges, and you know, there's I'm sure a few tight uniforms in some of our CID colleagues as they went back into that world, but it's nonetheless, it's what happens, you know, that police officer role kicking in at the very core. And hopefully as we are coming out the other side, we think it's nice to see some form of normality start to return. We've seen in the last few months lots of community spirit, as I've talked about. I also set up a COVID support fund, which was aimed at targeting some resources to support those groups that are out there supporting each other. I know, Tracy, you've been involved in some of that administration. What do you think you know, what kind of things has that money been spent on in Shropshire?
Oh, I have to say, when we've looked at community spirit, it has just been a fantastic, of all the bad things that have happened, it has been a fantastic time for that. And we have had people picking up prescriptions, doing shopping, newspapers, walking dogs, all sorts. And the idea of the fund was that you very sort of kindly said that, you know, because people were volunteering their time, you didn't want them to be out of pocket as well, because I think at the beginning of this, people sort of thought it would be 3 or 4 weeks. I don't think people envisage it would be 3 or 4 months. And, you know, certainly if you're sort of buying things for people, it can turn into quite a lot of money. So the fund, a lot of the fund has gone into providing PPE, hand sanitizer, gloves, etc. Then we've had lots of printing, if people have been sort of doing leaflets or information leaflets and ID badges, because obviously it's very important that when you're dealing with vulnerable people in the community, that they have the safety of knowing who you are. And so the badges came in very handy, but of course they can be expensive. So that's been nearly £50,000 worth out to our local communities, and Shropshire was a big part of that. So thanks very much, and let's hope it continues.
Because there's a population of 1.2 million across West Mercia, that a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things, supporting many thousands of hours worth of volunteering, keeping each other safe.
And Matt, so, sort of pound to pound by people's voluntary hours as well. So, you know, far more than that has been given in time, but it's a joint effort, isn't it?
So looking forward a bit more now, Mo, as we move towards the next stage, hopefully, of lockdown on the 4th of July, when a bit more of our freedom seems to be coming back. I'm just interested as to what your approach is to that change. You know, a lot of people have been looking forward to going to the hairdressers or to other things like that. So they've been looking forward to going to the pub. You obviously got the challenges of the nighttime economy coming as well. What's your sort of plan and approach towards that, the next change in these social distances changing?
I mean, very much we've been sort of planning for this potentially anyway, you know, envisaging that it was likely to be a release in sort of some of the restrictions going forward. So we've been working with the local authority, with the licensing department, particularly working with some of our towns and for example, Shrewsbury Bid, to go through and work through how, when these restrictions are lifted, how we will look to police that and the approach, and actually how can we make sure as a partnership that we make it the most possible sort of safe area for people that want to go out. You know, we do envisage people, you know, will want to go out, they will want to socialise with friends and family, and actually that makes a lot of people feel better, you know, in themselves. So we don't in any way want to sort of prevent that, but what we do want to make sure is that when people are going out to do that, they can have fun safely, but that they behave sensibly, and therefore, you know, making sure we work within the restrictions, but working with our partners around that and how we do that in the best possible way. Will be very much led by intelligence as well, so making sure that our police resources are there to respond to potential intelligence around what numbers do we feel we need on to deal with potential lifting in restrictions, and making sure, you know, that we are visible, but we are there, you know, to make sure that people have a good and safe time when they can go out and about again.
One of the things, especially in Shrewsbury, but it does reflect the rest of the county. Water is part of the beautiful geography that we live in. We've had some very tragic instances associated with the nighttime economy. What's your sort of message to not only to your troops policing it, but also the wider community?
I mean, obviously the Home and Dry campaign, I think, has been really good, that has been, you know, in place recently, and that's about sort of that engagement and education around being safe around water. You know, the shock when you enter cold water can't be, you know, underplayed, and unfortunately, as you say, particularly around Shrewsbury and some of our other areas in the county, we do have a lot of waterways. So for me, it's just about, you know, if you're out with friends, make sure you keep each other safe, keep away from that water edge. It only takes one fall or one trip for you to enter that water, you know, and unfortunately with the River Severn and other waterways that we have, the currents underneath will take you away. You don't know what debris is underneath there, and you know, if you are intoxicated, it will make it even more difficult for you to be able to swim. Even a competent swimmer in cold water potentially can drown within 60 seconds, and I think it's just being really conscious around that and making sure we look after each other when we're out.
And I think,
sorry, Tracy.
Sorry, Charles. And I think there was that's a really important point around that, because you know, for those of us who are from the West Mercia area, we've sort of grown up around this water, and I think sometimes we don't give it the regard that it needs. And I was staggered when I started doing this role, actually, at the number of people that do end up in the water and do drown in these beautiful rivers that we've got. But it's a startling amount, really.
There's some very good resources online called Home and Dry, and we want to make sure people enjoy their nights out and come home and get home safe and dry. And one thing for me is we can prevent a lot of this by looking out for each other. If we're out with a group of mates, etc., looking out for each other is important. Don't let people go home on their own if they are not as able as they should be. We've had a question in, and it does relate to how, as a bit of normality starts to return, we will have all seen the traffic drop off hugely during the early part of lockdown, and we've seen it dramatically increase, I think, in some parts of the Force area in Shropshire in the last few weeks. And so we are seeing more and more people travel to visit places, and we've got some very beautiful places. And one of them down near Much Wenlock, the A4169. Which is down on the edge of the town, where we are seeing more and more people travel and parking up, causing obstructions, associated litter, and ultimately impacting on the people that live there. And the questions are on a bit of is asking what can or what's the police's role and local police's role in supporting the community in dealing with some of these issues.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I know our Inspector for Local Policing, Nikki Roberts, has been involved very closely with the town council and attended one of the recent public town council meetings that were held to speak about that particular issue. For me, it's working with our partners, and certainly down there, I think where Shadwell Quarry is, where we have had some issues with, that is private property, so people should not be entering that that area. Likewise, again, you've got that vast amount of cold water. You don't know what's underneath it. You've got that cold water shock syndrome that could kick in very quickly. But for us, it's key as well that we do get the reports that come in. So on some occasions, we'll be advised of incidents after they've taken place, which we can then look to deal with. But ideally, we'd like to be able to deal with it there and then, if possible, you know, down to demand that we've got coming in. And so certainly I would encourage, you know, sort of local members of the public to link in with their safer neighbourhood team officers that are down at Much Wenlock and Broseley, which is PC Jess Hindley and a team down there. And just report those incidents to us, because what we do need to do is build a picture of that, work with our partners. So if it's an issue with obstruction of the highway, working with the highways and the council to see what can be done there, you know, looking at any potential criminal offences, if any of them taking place, that we can effectively deal with them. But yeah, so I would encourage, if they're seeing things that are happening there and then, call it in straight away. Don't be disheartened if you don't get a response straight away, because a lot of that will build into our intelligence picture, which may mean that moving forward we'll be able to deal with it and deal with that long-term issue by building all the intelligence and the picture together.
Because that's the key one, isn't it? Around first of all, you're not going to know unless somebody tells you if you don't see it, and you guys can't be everywhere. But the other is that partnership. Sometimes I and other members of the community are frustrated when whatever agency says, well, it's not our problem, it's somebody else's. And I've been really impressed by your Safe Neighbourhood team's approach of wanting to problem solve. So you might not have the direct power, but you want to be part of the solution. And I think that is a particular one where we've seen some effort, and hopefully it will pay off, because some communities feel quite strongly, and some of the impact of other people's behaviour can be greater than perhaps we as an individuals might think it is. You got Safe Neighbourhood teams based in all areas of Shropshire, and they all have individual named people who advertise their local contact details as well, don't they? So if people do have concerns, they can have a look on the West Mercia Police website and get in touch that way. The other thing I just wanted to touch on was Shrewsbury was unusual in West Mercia. We funded a couple of electric bikes that your teams had asked for. I'm very keen on bikes, making sure that officers have got the tools to be as visible as they can be. Just give us an idea what was behind the request, really, and what they'll be used for, what they will be in this weather. It didn't come with air conditioning, so I'm not sure I'd be so keen, but what would they be used for, Mo?
Yeah, so the bid came in from our town centre team, basically, to make sure that they could access parts of the town maybe that are not so able to get to so quickly on foot, but likewise other areas of the town that we're unable to access by vehicle. As you're probably aware, we've got numerous footpaths throughout the town leading onto the various roads, and for us it was to try and get to be able to respond quicker to some of these incidents. So being able to get out on the bikes, be able to get there more promptly, but also to make ourselves more visible and to be able to cover ground quicker. So, you know, we've got a dedicated team in the town centre, and for me it's just making sure that they were more accessible, more visible, that we can get to areas quicker than we previously used to be able to get to areas where we potentially can't get to in a car, and just be able to respond quicker really to the public. But they also help with us just being out and about. They encourage conversation, so people stop and talk to us about them. So we've been really impressed so far with the usage of them. As you can imagine, the officers are much keener to use the electronic bike than the pedal bike, so we have to share it out a bit. But yeah, they've gone down really well, and actually they're being used to full effect, which I'm really pleased about, because that's also key for me, that we do make sure we get the full usage out of them.
No, it's good to hear, and part of my I'm a big fan of bikes, as I said before, and I'm also a fan of lessening our impact on the environment. And later this year, we'll be seeing some electric vehicles introduced to the fleet for the first time, because we also have that responsibility. I know the town centre of Shrewsbury, lots of one-way systems and complicated routes, so I'd imagine a bike sometimes can be much more nippier to be able to get from one place to the other. One of the things, Mo, I just wanted to touch on about how our communities keep safe. I know you guys will investigate reports of crime and the like, but stopping it happening in the first place is a really good use of our time. And one of them is around things like doorstep scams and courier fraud and all those kind of things. Have you seen a rise of that during the COVID lockdown, and as it starts to be restricted, is it changing? And what kind of things are you doing to help support our community to not fall foul of those kind of things?
Yeah, so unfortunately, people do always take advantage of the difficult situations that we find ourselves in. So certainly there was a scam going around previously around the NHS sort of test and trace, and also around the COVID. So people were getting text messages basically saying that they've been diagnosed, but they needed to pay a certain amount of money to have the test done. And for us, the key there is just making sure that we educate and make sure that as many people are aware of these scams going around as possible. So certainly we work with our partners, particularly with the adult safeguarding team around that, to make sure that we get the messages out far and wide. Again, we've worked with the banks locally to make sure if they've got customers coming in and there's an unusual transaction that they're asking for, or they're looking to draw out a certain amount of money that doesn't seem the norm, that they're actually questioning that and understanding it. Again, for me, there's that responsibility with family and friends. So just making sure that you share those messages with your family and friends around some of the scams that are out there and about. Banks will never ask for your PIN number. Likewise, the police will never ask for any payment around things. And if you're ever unsure or it doesn't feel right, then, just put that phone down or shut the door. You can call us and we can respond, and we can quite easily then work out whether the call or the person attending is legitimate, or whether it's actually it's someone looking to take money from someone.
I think we keep doing that.
It's because whether it be a police officer or whether it be any legitimate person, they're never going to mind having their identity checked, are they? Whether they're at the door or whether they're on the phone. So that adage of if it doesn't feel right, it often isn't, and that few minutes of just saying I just want to check, either by ringing them or whatever it is can be an important one.
I was just going to say, John, actually, on the back of that we were talking earlier about the community spirit that's built up around, at these unprecedented times. And just as Mo was saying there about friends and family, but also if you have been shopping or prescriptions for somebody who is vulnerable and you see something happening with them that for whatever just doesn't look quite right, and it is about that, taking 5 minutes to think about what you have seen. And absolutely that should be fed in, because protecting those people that you've been looking after, they are now your neighbours, who they are. So if something happens, then like Mo said, feed that in.
Shropshire is a very beautiful county, obviously a lot bigger than just Shrewsbury itself. Lots and lots of a beautiful countryside, and lots of rural businesses and rural communities. One of my focuses has been about rural crime, and I know in Shropshire you guys have done a lot in relation to We Don't Buy Crime and the wider rural crime agenda. Just give us an insight as a bit of normality starts to return, what you're doing with your rural communities, business and those that just live there, to keep them safe as we start to get back to a bit more normal.
Yeah, so we've got, as you said, John, we've got a rural and business crime officer. We've got 2 very newly appointed police constables that are solely focused on working with rural and business crime, and again they're working with We Don't Buy Crime team, and very much they're out and about. Hopefully you've seen them around in the rural communities. They're looking to engage with the farming communities, with the rural communities. Just prior to the COVID, I'd met with the National Farmers Union to discuss with them some of the concerns that they have, particularly around livestock theft and machinery theft, and how that actually impacts their livelihoods. So for me, it's very much about us being visible, speaking to the communities, finding out what their concerns are, again with our safer neighbourhood teams, making sure we're linked in with those communities so that they feel confident they can report incidents to us, and let us know about issues that are going on. We don't always get things right, we're not always perfect, but certainly, if you raise a concern you know, we will do our best to respond to that. And likewise, please don't feel disheartened. If you feel you have to call us again, we will look to respond to that, you know, and work with you to make sure that we can make those communities as safe as possible.
Because one of my favourite sayings is there's no such thing as rural crime. It just happens to be crime that's committed in the countryside, isn't it? And the impact on a business of losing, you know, a quad bike could be the same as an impact of an urban business losing a forklift or a bit of equipment that they use in their business. And one of my central commitments as commissioner is that people get a good service. You know, not every crime can be solved or prevented, can it? And I don't think our communities expect that. I think they expect to be listened to when they report something or have concerns, and the appropriate action taken that the professionals judge, i.e. you guys. So I've been very impressed with the change, and indeed, hopefully that will start to build some of the confidence back. But my message, and hopefully it's one you chair, Mo, is for our rural communities, tell us if something's happening, tell us, don't put up with it, tell us. There's some great stuff like started to roll out farm packs that I've seen West Mercia Police are rolling out now. Really proud to support the funding for them. Can make a huge difference. The other thing I wanted to touch on, Mo, was it's called vulnerability. It's things we talk about it, but it's when people are being exploited by others, isn't it? And it can be the most serious. Children being exploited sexually or into criminality, all the way through to a very low level exploitation of somebody in their own home by somebody that they're related to or living to. Lots of policing has changed to being behind the closed door rather than in plain sight. And I'm just interested in your approach in Shropshire as to how with the forces priorities of safer roads, you know, safer homes, and safer communities, we want to make sure those safer homes, and how we are trying to support people to be less vulnerable to being exploited by those that want to take advantage. Yeah,
so you know, we have our own team dedicated here locally, particularly that look at that exploitation. So if we're talking about what people would use the term cuckooing, which is where vulnerable people are exploited in their own homes, that may be to do errands for other people that they don't want to, that might be to supply certain things, or they just use their home to operate out from. We work really closely again with partners to make sure we can identify those people at the earliest possible stage. And what we do is look to work with them as a victim rather than actually criminalising them. So, you know, working with them to understand their vulnerabilities and making sure that we can support them and give them the correct sort of guidance, you know, to help them through that process. And at the same time, making sure we pursue and disrupt those people that are exploiting those vulnerable persons. Likewise with children, you know, we work closely with partners there in relation to that, and certainly with my youth engagement team going forward, we're looking very much towards that early intervention with our young children, and identifying at the very earliest possible stage a concern or worry, so that together we can work with those children to make sure that, you know, that vulnerability is you know, reduced, and actually that they get the opportunities that they should do.
I had to mute myself because one of the neighbours' dogs was barking. The joys of doing it in your kitchen. And it's a very important subject. And county towns that we've got in lots of in West Mercia and in Shropshire, whether it be Oswestry, you know, Market Drayton, Ellesmere, Bridge North Ludlow, I can think of lots of them in your geography, where we often think organised crime or drugs isn't prevalent. Well, actually it is in our community. There are people being exploited, and it might be our neighbour. And your guys' work about educating us as a community as a whole to look out for it is important, but also tackling those that do cause this is a really important one. I think one of the last areas of our society where we need to be a bit more open about, whether it be somebody who might be subject to domestic abuse, whether it might be somebody who is being exploited to deal drugs from their property. I think speaking up is part of our civic duty.
And I think on the back of that, John, as well, so particularly when we're talking around children, the reason we've revamped the diversionary network and relaunched it is absolutely around that, things that are happening to our younger people, and they get themselves into situations that they can't get out of. And setting up a whole system around them to just, you know, get them to focus on other things. So whether it be sport or music or whatever they need, but to help them get out of the situation that they've got themselves into. And a lot of that, again, will be down to the engagement of the community to tell us who these children are, because whatever they're doing, there'll be a reason for why.
I know that I sound like a fuddy-duddy when I say it, but the threats to young people or to people in 2020 are very different to what they were 10 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. So for me, the force adapting and supporting the force to adapt is always going to be a priority. Mo, really, we've just gone over the half an hour mark, going to draw it to an end, really, and just an opportunity if there's anything you wanted to say to the communities in Shropshire, a message from you as a police commander, anything you wanted to say.
I think just again, really, just to iterate the thank you for the support that we've had over the few months in relation to COVID. You know, some of the rainbows that we've had the kids draw for us that have been sent in, some of the lovely messages of support that we've had, both through letters and on social media. So a big thank you from me for that. And again, I just really encourage people, if they have a concern, you know, do report it in. It may well be that piece of that jigsaw that we're looking for in relation to intelligence that may allow us to then follow up something. So I would always encourage people to call in. There's various ways you can do that, you know, online, by the phone via 101. If it's an emergency, obviously 999. Or if you feel that you can't speak to us direct, then there is always Crime Stoppers, which is completely anonymous. We never find out who's made that call, but again, that information will be shared with us and we can use it as well.
I as Commissioner, are very proud to be Commissioner, as I said earlier, and part of my role is holding the force to account, and I do that without fear or favour. And there are times when West Mercia Police need to improve, or indeed things don't go correctly. But what we have seen in the 3 months that COVID has come to our county, I think the police play their part in supporting the community to deal with it has been exceptional. I think our community have supported the way that we've been policed in those recent months, and I think they've been proud to say that they are their police. And we look at other parts of the world and we see where that community connection, that community consent isn't there. And I look back here in Shropshire and I do think to ourselves, well, actually, the mission set by the Chief Constable in the way that policing would happen during that period has panned out, and that consent still being there. And I want to thank you and your colleagues for the work that you've done, because you've all been worried about yourselves and your family and the health in the same way that the rest of us have. And to still turn up and still man that blue line to keep us safe as a community is something I'm incredibly grateful and on behalf of our community very thankful for.
Thank you.
Tracy, I don't know whether you wanted to add anything. You were nodding, but
no, just to reiterate that message, really, and again, just to say, you know, there will never be a police officer right next door to everybody, but you are. There will nearly always be a neighbour. We've met our communities now. It's a great time to keep that community spirit going. And as I say, if you see something just that looks a little bit odd, just take 5 minutes, and if it doesn't stack up, then let somebody know about it.
So I want to thank you both for joining us this evening and your time and taking part. Thank you to the public and the questions that we had submitted. We're doing a series of these. This broadcast will be on our Facebook site afterwards, so people are able to watch it back. If you had a question and you haven't submitted one, then either do it via our social medias or directly. Or indeed, if you're looking for your local police officer, then you can look on the West Mercia Police website for their contact details. It falls to me to thank you for joining us. We'll be in North Worcestershire, South Worcestershire and Herefordshire next week. And thank you for watching, and please do stay safe.